Welcome and thank you for joining us today for Identity Management Buyer's Guide for the SME. My name is Raleigh Gould and I'll be the moderator for today's event. Our featured speaker is Steve Brasen, Research Director at Enterprise Management Associates. Steve's career at EMA follows 20 plus years of in-the-trenches experience in IT system support, engineering, and management for high technology, telecommunications, and financial institutions. He's a recognized leading voice on topics related to IT and access management technologies and best practices. And before I hand it over to Steve, I wanted to let the audience know that we will be concluding today's event by taking your questions. Please feel free to log them anytime by using the Q&A functionality. Also, today's event is being recorded and you will receive a follow-up email from EMA with the on-demand playback and additional resources. So I hope you'll check that email out. And now I'd like to go ahead and turn things over to our featured speaker, Steve Brasen. Steve?
Thank you very much, Raleigh, and thank you all for joining us today for our discussion on how to select an optimal identity management solution that specifically addresses the needs of small and medium-sized enterprises. Now, in particular, today's presentation is all about showcasing the types of solutions SMEs should adopt that will broadly achieve requirements for identity security without requiring large dedicated management teams or excessive budgets. Now, to help clarify this topic, I'll be revealing for the first time results from an independent research study we conducted comparing two of the leading identity management solutions on the market today, Okta Workforce Identity and the JumpCloud platform. The points of comparison specifically target SME requirements and can actually be used to evaluate any identity management solution. So here's a quick peek at the agenda. We're going to start with a brief discussion on the requirements and challenges of managing employee identities in small and medium-sized enterprises. And that will really set the stage for us to reveal our evaluation process and product comparison results. In particular, we'll be focusing on 5 key platform characteristics: architectural complexity, identity lifecycle management, authentication management, endpoint device management, and the total cost of ownership. So it's quite a lot to cover, so let's dive right in. Now, to begin, I think it's important to define exactly what we mean when we talk about small and medium-sized enterprises. The term actually refers to a legally defined business entity. However, as I was investigating this, I found out that every country seems to define an SME differently. Now, typically, the SME designation refers to the number of employees in an organization along with its revenue stream. For the purposes of our evaluation and also today's discussions, we're going to define the scope of an organization with fewer than 1,000 workers and earning between 1 million and 100 million in annual revenue as an SME. Now, I would argue that from an IT management perspective, it's much more important a differentiator in regard to how the organization's IT infrastructure is managed. SMEs primarily consist of full-time employees rather than outsourcers or contractors. IT resources, therefore, are principally managed by the business, not by a managed service provider. Mid-sized organizations that regulate a large portion of their workforces to outsources would be more frequently referred to as a small and medium-sized business. So that's the key difference between an SME and an SMB. SMEs actually manage their own infrastructures. SMBs typically do not. Now, unfortunately, self-managed IT services introduce a number of business challenges. SMEs are smaller in size and have more restrictive budgets than their larger competitors. So they have to learn to do more with fewer resources in order to stay competitive. In IT, this burden usually falls on the shoulders of IT administrators. Large enterprises are able to hire teams of specialists to support the breadth of IT management. They'll have a team for, say, endpoint management, and a team for network management, and a team for identity management, and so forth. With SMEs, administrators have to wear many hats so they can support all of these management disciplines as needed. So as a result, SMEs typically hire IT generalists rather than IT specialists. Now, these staffing limitations have a particular effect on the ability of an SME to support identity management, as most organizations will have few, if any, identity specialists. And this can affect overall business performance. Identity and access management is a key driver for attaining business success in really any organization. I mean, think about it. In order to enable employees to rapidly respond to customer requests or complete assigned tasks, they must be able to access required apps, data, and IT services, right? However, enabling this access must not happen at the cost of achieving enterprise security. This is actually the primary goal of identity management, which is securing enterprise IT assets without inhibiting workforce productivity. Organizations that successfully balance both requirements have a competitive advantage over those that do not. Now, here are the identity and access management goals that particularly pertain to small and medium-sized enterprises. Attaining security assurance naturally tops this list. Our primary research indicates that 87% of all organizations experience an identity-related breach each and every year. And nearly all of these face significant business consequences as a result, including IT service failures, employee impacts, and diminished business performance. While large businesses can weather these kinds of breach events, the impacts are magnified in relation to SMEs. Now, as mentioned, enabling workforce productivity is also essential, as employees should never have to jump through hoops to access the resources they need to perform job tasks. Most modern SMEs are also engaged in some level of digital transformation, necessitating identity management processes to be integrated to a wide variety of disparate cloud, on-premises, and on-device applications. SMEs also rely on identity solutions to enable them to achieve regulatory compliance, such as HIPAA, PCI, SOX, GDPR. Not only do identity platforms secure sensitive business data and resources, they also assist with providing required proof of compliance. And I don't think anybody will be surprised to learn that today, roughly half of all business tasks are performed when employees are physically outside of the office. And SMEs are actually more likely to have work from home policies than larger enterprises. Now, this means that businesses must enable the same level of access to remote workers that they provide for employees who are physically on premises. And finally, identity management is also important for attracting and retaining workers, retaining talent. SMEs typically lack the brand visibility and often can't offer the same salary ranges as their larger competitors. Now, our research shows that compensation is not always the top consideration amongst talented workers. In fact, roughly 1 out of every 10 business professionals that we surveyed indicated they would seek employment elsewhere if they were constantly faced with difficult or annoying access experiences. So, those digital experiences can be very important to user workforce satisfaction, and also can attract and retain those workforces. So with all this in mind, what are the types of identity management solutions that SMEs should be adopting to achieve all of those requirements? Well, at a high level, the platform characteristics should be pretty predictable. It should be easy to deploy and manage identity solutions. SMEs can't afford to have a dedicated team of developers designing and maintaining the platform all the time. So it should be simple enough for a common administrator to learn, implement, and manage on a day-to-day basis. It also needs to be extensible, so it can connect to all of the IT apps and services supported by the business. Extensibility allows the platform to grow with the business as new services are introduced over time. And of course, it needs to be cost effective. And I'm referring to the total cost of ownership here, not just the product licensing costs, because infrastructure, maintenance, and support costs are often forgotten when you start looking at how expensive a solution is going to be. What SMEs really need to do is identify an identity management solution that is right-sized for their particular organizational needs. And what I mean by that is you can think of a very low-cost solution will lack the level of required functionality and extensibility that the organization needs. But conversely, the adoption of more expensive platforms may result in overpaying for a lot of extra bells and whistles that will never actually be used. So you want that sweet spot where you're buying exactly what you need, but not more than you need. So let's dive into the weeds a little bit with this and talk about specific identity management platform capabilities that address the needs of small and medium-sized enterprises. Now, as I mentioned, we recently conducted a very extensive competitive analysis between two identity management platforms on the market today, Okta Workforce Identity and the JumpCloud platform. We began this analysis by carefully identifying key characteristics for an identity management solution that would be most favorable to SME audiences. We then reviewed each platform's architecture and feature sets to see how well they aligned with our established KPIs and came to some very interesting and surprising conclusions. Now, even if you're not specifically interested in either of these particular solution sets, I think you'll find it very valuable to learn the platform characteristics that we reviewed and how we identified their value in respect to the SME environments. So the best and perhaps most important place to begin is with respect to the product architectures. Simply, the more complex the infrastructure, the more difficult and time-consuming it will be to deploy, manage, and maintain. Both the Okta and JumpCloud solutions are managed from cloud-hosted platforms. However, there is a substantial difference between the two in the design of their core directory. So let me explain that a little bit. A directory is a centralized repository for storing IT information. And in identity management, directories are used to store and record things like account names, access policies, and of course, shared secrets such as passwords. Traditionally, large enterprises store this information for on-premises resources in a Microsoft Active Directory or LDAP server in order to manage access to those on-premises resources. However, these directories need to be deployed on physical servers that need to be purchased and maintained. Also, these directories do not manage access to resources outside of the local business network. Both Okta and JumpCloud's directory services manage access to remote resources such as web or SaaS apps. However, Okta does not natively manage access to any on-premises apps and systems. So instead, Okta bidirectionally shares information with an on-premises Active Directory or LDAP server. This is what we call a federated directory service because the platform is actually aggregating the flow of information from multiple directories in order to support both cloud-hosted and on-premises accessed resources. Now, by comparison, JumpCloud's directory can manage all of these IT resources, including on-premises applications and systems without relying on any additional directories. This is what we call a unified directory. Now, to be clear, JumpCloud could actually optionally be configured as a federated directory by integrating with an Active Directory server. You might want to do this if you want to support migrations or have some other unique requirements, but it's certainly not required. And I think it's actually probably rarely done because of the disadvantages of doing a federated directory approach. For example, if we looked at Okta's solution, Okta's federated directory requires the deployment of a number of on-premises software components in addition to the directory server needed to manage on-premises resources. So most notably, the Okta Access Gateway is a reverse process application that must sit behind a business firewall to enable access without the need for establishing a VPN connection. JumpCloud's approach does not require any of these additional software components because it establishes connections directly with agents installed on the supported endpoints, which can be either physical or virtual. Another architectural consideration is the natively supported support that's provided for outbound protocols. Now, protocols are a standard set of rules that enable communication between two network systems. It's kind of like a Rosetta Stone for IT communications. It translates one set of information to another set of information. Protocols are particularly useful in identity management as they enable centralized management of third-party application tools. For example, SAML, OAuth, and OpenID Connect are very commonly employed for enabling single sign-on and multi-factor authentication to SaaS and web apps. And all three of these are supported by both the Okta and the JumpCloud identity management solutions. SCIM, or Systems for Cross-Domain Identity Management, is another open standard supported by both providers and is often used to automate processes for adding or removing users from remote applications. In fact, both vendors publish online catalogs of SaaS applications supported by SCIM integrations. Another tool is called the Remote Authentication Dial-In User Service, or I'll just call it Radius for short because it's a mouthful. This is a commonly used to enable remote access services that communicate with company networks. Now, I mentioned earlier the increased need for SMEs to support remote workforces. Well, Radius connections have popularly been adopted as a more secure method for authenticating remote users than using traditional VPNs. JumpCloud uniquely includes what they call a Radius as a Service feature that allows the JumpCloud directory to host the credentials or certificates used to authenticate users over a Radius connection. Now, while Okta does not natively offer a similar service, support for Radius connections can actually be enabled with the installation of an on-premises Radius server agent, which again is adding more complexity and more, providing more resources that administrators need to manage. Many on-premises infrastructure components, such as file servers and applications, are designed to specifically share information using an LDAP protocol. And of course, you can manage access to these by deploying an on-premises LDAP server, which is actually how it would be done in an Okta environment. But JumpCloud also offers a more streamlined approach by allowing its cloud directory service to natively and directly communicate with on-premises resources using the LDAP protocol, and without requiring a separate or dedicated LDAP server. Now they call this, wait for it, LDAP as a service. So JumpCloud uniquely offers both Radius as a service and LDAP as a service, a very unique capability for them. So let's move on to talking about some of the actual identity management functionality. Identity lifecycle management refers to a platform's ability to manage employee access from the time they join the company through the time they leave, and everything in between. And we found that both Okta and JumpCloud offer very comparable functionality in relation to the requirements we defined for SMEs. Now, these include things like the ability to centrally onboard new user accounts, managing multiple users for group policies, detecting if a user has changed roles or their status has changed, performing compliance audits, and centrally suspending or deactivating accounts. We noted a few differences. For instance, Okta supports the ability to run certificate campaigns to assist with identity governance, while JumpCloud natively includes a scheduler for activating or deactivating accounts at a particular date and time. Now, Okta can only schedule the events by orchestrating a workflow. It can't actually perform this function directly from the management console. So these are just a few differences, but broadly they provide a very similar level of support. Bigger differences that we saw were in how passwords were being managed by the two solutions. Now, both vendors support broad capabilities for creating and enforcing password policies like password complexity and password aging. However, the passwords themselves are stored very differently. With Okta, passwords are centrally stored on a cloud service in a secured repository called a password vault. Now, by comparison, JumpCloud stores passwords on secured vaults on the endpoints themselves. Now, additionally, JumpCloud provides a password manager that can be installed on the endpoints, the PCs and mobile devices, that can autofill passwords on the devices and on the browsers, so users don't have to memorize complex and constantly changing password strings. You're probably very familiar with these types of technologies, but this actually comes native with the JumpCloud platform. You don't need to purchase anything in addition, and then works across your enterprise. JumpCloud also offers a password sharing tool. Now, basically, passwords that need to be shared among multiple individuals are distributed in an encrypted folder that only designated managers can view and edit. Now, members who are assigned access to that password folder could use it to autofill the password characters during login sessions, but they never actually get to see the actual password characters because they'll be blocked out or starred out on the login screens. So that's just another sort of useful feature. We do see more commonalities when looking at multi-factor authentication, though. Both solutions can natively issue a second authentication factor as a timed-based one-time password or push notification. They fully support passwordless authentication by leveraging the FIDO standards. With both platforms, you can also create conditional access policies that can allow or deny access based on contextual conditions, such as the location of the device or the network it's communicating over. Conditional access policies can also define the type, number, and frequency of authentications based on specific conditions. We did find that Okta additionally allows conditional policies to respond to a calculated risk score that they determine. Another area where we're seeing increased interest in these days are solutions that provide support for what's called least privilege access. Now, if you're not familiar, the principle of least privilege access asserts that users should only be granted access to the resources they require to perform job tasks. So a great example of a tool that's commonly being employed for this is what's called just-in-time provisioning, or JIT for short. Rather than broadly creating user accounts to every application for every user and organization in that organization, just-in-time provisioning which is supported by both of the platforms that we evaluated, leverages the SAML protocol to pass account creation information to web applications. And as an added benefit, this approach also reduces the day-to-day management burden on administrators, since they don't have to go in and create and remove these accounts. The end users actually end up doing it themselves. Least privilege access privileges should also, and perhaps more critically, be applied to privileged accounts. In fact, the concepts originally applied to privileged access management, but definitely apply to administrator and root accounts on endpoint devices. Now, sometimes it's necessary for administrators to grant employees the ability to perform privileged tasks on their own endpoint devices in order to support self-service management and reduce administrator workloads. Well, JumpCloud actually uniquely offers the ability for administrators to remotely provision and deprovision administrator access on endpoint devices without having to log into those devices. In this way, administrator rights do not need to be automatically granted on all of the endpoints, right? You can just selectively apply them onto devices as they are needed. Another clear area of differentiation between the two platforms is with the level of support provided for securing endpoint devices. Both solutions collect a lot of information from endpoint devices to support things like device-based access groups or conditional access policies. However, this is the extent of Okta's endpoint device support. And their large enterprise customers typically have to purchase third-party tools to supplement the platform, which is fine, I suppose, if you have the budget to burn. But the products would not be integrated, so it's certainly wouldn't be considered a unified solution. By comparison, the JumpCloud agent installed on managed endpoints can support a variety of administration functionalities. Now, for instance, it can centrally manage and enforce policies directly on the endpoints, so administrators can add, change, and remove local device user accounts, as well as define which activity a user may perform on each of those endpoint devices. JumpCloud administrators can also create policies that govern the behavior of lock screens, such as how long it's allowed to sit in, a device is allowed to sit inactive before forcing a lock-in screen to come up and force a re-authentication. Other features include the ability to distribute and execute automation scripts, install applications, and encrypt disk volumes on the endpoint devices. So those are just some of the key features that we compared across the breadth of identity management. So I think at this point, let's move on and let's talk about price a little bit. Or more to the point, the total cost of ownership of the platform. License costs are certainly the easiest to quantify. In fact, the numbers that you see here are taken directly from the respective vendor websites. There's no magic here. And I tried to present them here side by side for easy comparison. Both vendor licenses, both vendors license their platforms on a cost per managed user per month basis, right? So the number of you multiply the number of the cost by the number of users, and that's how much you pay each month for the platform. Okta offers an a la carte menu where customers can pick and choose the specific feature sets that they wish to purchase, whereas JumpCloud offers bundled package tiers. Now, for example, you would start with a basic SSO package. Customers can then upgrade the core to the core directory package, which includes all of the capabilities of the basic SSO package, plus the LDAP and Radius services and directory insights, and so on and so forth, with each higher tier building on the tiers beneath it. And this is where you can really see a clear difference in the license cost. Now, for instance, if you consider an organization that just needs the bare minimum identity management support, so directory services, single sign-on, lifecycle management, multi-factor authentication, and the ability to create workflows, JumpCloud customers would only need to purchase the basic SSO package for $7 per user per month to get all of those features. Comparatively, Okta customers would need to purchase the 5 a la carte modules to provide the same level of support. At a total of, you can add them up, right? $23 per user per month. It's significantly more expensive. In fact, if you purchase the full breadth of JumpCloud's identity management capabilities, which are all included in the Platform Plus tier, it only costs $18 per user per month, as compared with a comparative solution from Okta costing $28 per user per month. So again, JumpCloud's approach is significantly less expensive. But that's not all. As I mentioned, when you look at total cost of ownership, there are other factors to consider. In order to enable access to on-premises systems and application, Okta requires the deployment of an Active Directory or LDAP server, which naturally incurs additional hardware and software costs. So you have to calculate those in as well. And I did some basic calculations based on minimum requirements for those kinds of services. Somewhat harder to quantify are the cost impacts necessary to support ongoing IT administration, but it's still possible to make some reasonable calculations with this. With the additional management requirements of supporting complex architectures and on-premises infrastructure components that are necessary in an Okta environment, as well as the need to manually administer user accounts on endpoint devices, we can conservatively estimate that on average, 1 hour of additional administrative support would be required per week for every 1 hour, 100 supported users. This translates into the equivalent of a quarter of the time for one full-time employee in order to support every 1,000 workers. And that adds up over time, right? So the average full compensation for an IT administrator, including salary and total benefits, is roughly $150,000 per year. So you double it you double actual salaries in order to achieve full compensation costs. So you can estimate an Okta customer will pay the equivalent of $37,500 per year in administrator time, or the equivalent of that, in the administrative time and effort for every 1,000 workers that are supported. That's $37,500 more per year than would be required in a JumpCloud environment. So putting together all of these, the full TCO evaluation elements, I mean, you can see I've calculated here all the numbers out by organizational size, just to give you an idea how they scale. For the license costs, I'm using the pricing for the full management suites, so the total cost of getting the full the breadth of capabilities for the two platforms. Now, I highly encourage you to perform your own TCO comparison for whatever products that you're going to be evaluating, but this will give you an idea of how that process is done. From our evaluation results, well, it's pretty clear. JumpCloud is coming out as roughly at least 40% less expensive than the comparable Okta solution. And that really, in total leads us to some key conclusions about the platform. SMEs need to identify identity and access management solutions that meet their organizational requirements, but they should never overpay for popular brand names or features that they will never use. Now, clearly, Okta is targeting large enterprises with its feature set. To be fair, Okta does offer a number of advanced features, such as support for identity governance and intelligent analysis, but these weren't included in our valuation because we regard these as out of scope for the typical small and medium-sized enterprise. Large enterprises with big budgets and large support teams can afford these luxuries, but quite frankly, they're not the types of features SMEs will likely have time to play with or really get any value from. The JumpCloud platform, by comparison, was more specifically designed to address the needs of SMEs by being an all-in-one solution, centrally managing access to IT resources that are on premises, in the cloud, and actually on the endpoint devices. Given the results from this research, I thought it would be helpful today and informative for me to reach out to JumpCloud and ask them to join in on today's discussion. So I would like to welcome Greg Armanini, Vice President of Product Management with JumpCloud, who is generously sharing some of his time today to tell us a little bit more about how JumpCloud is supporting SMEs among their customers. Greg, thank you very much for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Steve. I really appreciate it. It'll be fun
I
conversation.
should mention, Greg, that you gave me a few slides to share. So I actually added these to my presentation deck. So feel free to prompt me to advance them when you're ready. And probably a good place to start is if you could maybe tell us an overview of the platform and JumpCloud's general identity management philosophy as it relates to SMEs.
Yeah, happy to. If you just want to, sure. So I think, Steve, you did a really good job, doing a base level comparison of the identity core platform frameworks. And I think that's a great way to evaluate any vendor. What I wanted to do here is maybe talk about the high level vision and to some degree journey that JumpCloud's gone through. Because in truth, right, every identity or device management or really IT vendor has a slightly different set of emphases, and it's based on their history in large part. Now, obviously, you've already called out quite well that we focus on specific market segments, and I do have a little more to share there. So for your audience to understand how we got to where we are today and how our customers value us, but it all starts with what is JumpCloud conceptually, and this is really that sort of history of JumpCloud. We're about 9 years old as a company. So we've been around we're well past startup age and we're into growth company age. Our journey began as an alternative to Active Directory. So we were a cloud directory, similar to a Jumpbox. We thought, hey, let's be a JumpCloud. And that's how we got our name. We started with managing users and their identities in the cloud. And that would allow you to, of course, manage federations. And that grew very quickly into registering devices, very similar to the way you would do in a legacy directory within JumpCloud. Very soon after that, with federation and, as you called out, access to on-prem resources, we started managing applications and networks and infrastructure. So you can see there's a triad forming here over time. So JumpCloud intrinsically is about identity management, so user accounts, about device management, about across desktop, mobile, and virtual servers as well, and IT resources. Now, over time, this went from just a place to register your endpoints to looking at the connections between them. So we have a singular graph now where we can, look at events and meaning. And really it becomes more of an if engine of sorts. And at the end of the day, you can run your organization on top of JumpCloud as an insights platform. And that's really, where ultimately JumpCloud will be emphasizing. We want to make sure that in the world we all live in now today, where you have cloud resources, you have on-prem resources, you have remote workers, you need to have visibility to all of those users and endpoints and what they're doing. And this is really our ethos here. So we're slightly different than other vendors. It's in part because of history, but also because of the way we view the world. We want to give you a single place to view and remediate everything in your organization. So we feel like that is the future, and this is really what we're all about. So you want to move on to the next slide, Steve? This is sort of the next level down view. And for those who are familiar with identity and access platforms, maybe UEM platforms, this will be somewhat familiar. So if you think about the journey that JumpCloud is on to be that single directory to contain all of your resources, there's those underlying protocols and integrations that to some degree Steve already called out. So we, of course, work with upstream directories, be Active Directory, Google, Okta, of course. So anybody who supports an identity standard Whether it's skim in from an upstream directory. We also have custom APIs to integrate with, directories that don't support things like skim. We can sync passwords bidirectionally. So a lot of our customers have another IDP. They use us because we can extend the capabilities of that IDP. Maybe it's device management, maybe it's access to on-prem resources, things like that. So there's a lot we can do with other directories. You don't have to, pick one over the other. We, of course, as HIRS integrations and, that market has developed, also work with all of those. So that is very similar to other identity platforms. Okta would do similar stuff here. We have very tight relationships with Bob, Personio, Workday. Some of those are standard-based integrations, not all. But this allows us to, from day one, have workflow where we can, manage an end user lifecycle and then provision users to the applications and resources they need, which you see on the right. All of those integrations, as Steve already called out, you have access to via standard protocols, whether it's SCIM or OIDC. Some of them are not standard, some are legacy. So you see down there network access. So if you want to have your users authenticate to the Wi-Fi networks at your various branch locations, you can do that through JumpCloud. We can just as easily get you access to a NAS or something like that. If it's LDAP, we of course, will do what you would expect, which is we could allow you to access your LDAP service, but also enforce an MFA on top of that. So you get everything you need to run your organization from a single platform view. So I think that most customers today are expecting a version of this. And again, vendors do differ in their points of emphasis. Steve, you, I think, did a great job calling that out. But my advice to anybody who is in the market for a platform that will help them grow and to some degree future-proof their organization, you want to be looking like a view like this. You want to be able to see these kinds of areas of emphasis from any vendor. This is really critical for this day and age. You want a platform to manage your business on. Next slide, Steve.
Sure.
So, in terms of areas of emphasis, so clearly I showed you a really expansive vision that we and others will go for. We, of course, do have a focus as well. And the way to think about this is, at the end of the day, you can think about JumpCloud as a combination of an IAM platform, that's that blue circle on the left, and a UEM platform, that's the green circle on the right. And, a lot of what Steve talked about today was in that blue area. What do you do in terms of the core, feature capabilities? You need user management. You obviously need authentication and federation out of any of your vendors. You need to be able to support an MFA. You need to do provisioning, right? Both users when they onboard, as I described, with an HIRS or downstream to a service provider. So that's a huge deal, not just in terms of convenience, but in terms of TCO and cost management of licenses, things like that. So you absolutely need those. The most organizations, if not all, also require device management. So we didn't talk a lot about that for obvious reasons in Steve's analysis, but this is also top of mind for most customers today because of a device at the end of the day is an attack vector, right? So your employees are going to cafes, right? They may be trying to access company resources on their own devices. You need to have the ability to manage those endpoints, whether it's through your UEM platform like JumpCloud or through a point solution. It's a must-have. And you need to be able to manage every OS. You have to obviously control configs what apps are allowed and not allowed on devices, as well as the onboarding of devices. There's standard ways to do that. You obviously need, especially in a remote first world, to accomplish that without having to worry, because usually IT admins are not in front of users anymore. Now, the important thing is the intersection of these two. This is where you start to really think about your company strategy, your long-term goals, and what you need to be successful. And what I mean by that is when you can manage a user and the device together in a single plane, you have a very powerful combination of capabilities that will help you secure your business, as well as save time, reduce costs. So there's obvious things that come into play here if you use a JumpCloud-like solution. So a single admin experience, that is in the boring but important camp, because you have precious resources in terms of your admins. You don't want to retrain them again and again. So things like this are actually really important. Of course, when you combine these two concepts, you can have common orchestration flows rather than building orchestration flows in different platforms. That's important. Having device trust or real-time posture assessment, that is super important. That's where the industry is going. We all know that identity and access allows you to control initial authentication, but there's a session length, right? So what you need to be thinking about is continuous evaluation. And you can get there when you can manage both the user and their authentication, as well as the device and the device posture. So that is obviously, when you think about zero trust, a really critical pillar. That's something you can do with a combined platform. You can also, with the other side of the same coin, control end-to-end conditional access policies. Obviously mission critical, because you need to be able to think about who are your core users, who are your maybe contractors, who are people accessing on BYO versus corporate resources. And you need to have independent access policy for each of those use cases to make sure it is seamless and secure. I won't go into too much detail. Steve, I think you did a really good job covering the notion of, passwordless zero trust. It all goes hand in hand when you can manage both the user and the device. I will point out that a great percentage of customers and the industry today still uses password. It's, passwords are, what I'll say, is a necessary evil for the foreseeable future. Some of the reasons are as simple as the fact that if you have, say, a Mac desktop computer in your organization, in order to encrypt a device, right, which most companies need to do, you have to secure that with a password. You can't get around that. So passwords are just part of reality. Now, you can make those more secure with password policies. Steve already called that out, or enforcing MFA on top of that. So there are strategies to insulate, but the reality is you're living in a world where there's a continuum of password to passwordless experiences. And at JumpCloud and many other platforms, we need to support all of those. At the end of the day, I already called this out a little bit, but I'll just touch on it briefly. When you combine all of this, you need a heads-up display so that you can have compliance reporting, whether it's for some kind of SOC compliance or benchmark or your own internal standards. You need to be able to have those reports, see who's in and out of compliance, also export that information as needed to your scene, etc. So last slide, Steve, we can jump ahead to one of the punchlines. When you have a platform like JumpCloud or another platform that does similar things, you can think about your organization strategically in terms of how do you want to manage your organization, grow it. But in this climate in particular, right, where we're facing headwinds in the market, consolidation is really important. And, there's any number of ways you could look to consolidate. Steve, I think you did a good job talking about just IAM to IAM heads up. You can do it that way, but you can also look across your IT stack and you can think about what you can consolidate. Platforms like JumpCloud allow you to do a lot. You can consolidate some of your point solutions. You can consolidate your legacy remote desktop. So that's something that you may not be thinking about as a first order of operations if you are the person who owns identity in your organization. But rest assured, there's a lot of people who own desktops that are spending a lot of time and effort managing desktops for their employees remotely. And there's a high cost of things like TeamViewer or Splashtop. And not to pick on those, I mean, they're great products, but you could get that for free, for instance, in JumpCloud. So when you look across the continuum of capabilities, you have an even bigger consolidation opportunity, even more so than what Steve called out, because you can consolidate your MDM vendors, your remote desktops. Obviously, you can consolidate your identity and access in general into a single platform. So I'm a little biased, I have to admit, but this is going to be the future, right? So the world of identity and device management is largely becoming one of standards. So what you want to do is you want to have vendors that have the most breadth and the vision to kind of get you where you need to go. Now, obviously, we all have different areas of emphasis, but I think that, in your evaluation, you, of course, have to look across the board and see, okay, is the platform good enough, or do you want to stick to your point solution? I think every company is different. It's a decision about whether you must have, a specific solution because of history or contract terms, or whether you can afford to look at it as a commoditized thing that you could add into another platform. So with that said, I'll pause there. Steve, I know I did a lot of talking.
Yeah, no, that was very, very, very informative for me. I know particularly I found you revealing some of the history behind how the platform evolved over time to be very informative. It really sort of speaks to how you got to where you are today with providing this broad set of capabilities with a unified solution. As you pointed out, I mean, I was really focused on specifically on identity and access management, but there's a real point to be made here about the breadth of the platform for supporting other IT management capabilities, in particular in relation to small and medium-sized enterprises, right? I mean, this idea that they're cost-strapped and they have limited budgets and things like that. The ability to perform, the same support for a lot of these capabilities that you have listed here from the one platform brings a lot of value, I think, to those organizations.
Yeah, I absolutely would agree. And again, I just want to underscore that every platform is a little different, right? Okta,
Yep.
as you already called out, goes up market or focuses on workflows. If you're Okta,
Yep.
they want to get into ITSM. That's not our cup of tea right now, right? So you have to bear that in mind as you look at some of these decisions.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, before we get into questions, and I know I see a couple of questions here, I just wanted to briefly mention that in my presentation, I was only actually able to present a small portion of the detailed evaluation that we conducted. We spent months on this project. If you're interested in seeing the full report and the full results, you can actually reach out to today's special guests from JumpCloud using the contact information on this screen, and they'll be able to hook you up with a free copy of the report. So with that, I'll turn it over to Raleigh to drive us through the Q&A.
Great. Thank you, Steve. Thank you both, Greg and Steve, for those great insights. Greg, there were several questions that came in when you were presenting. The first one is, how do you determine if there's a change made through, say, Active Directory directly before the next audit?
We constantly monitor the directory. So we have a component of JumpCloud called Directory Insights. So, anything that's happening in AD or any other component of the stack is monitored. You can query for it. So everything is essentially trailed in AD into JumpCloud. So that's your first stop shop. Whether you want to know if a resource was added, removed, what permissions somebody has, is a new user added, all of that, who's authenticating is in our Directory Insights tooling.
Good to know. Thank you. Another question that came in is, I assume JumpCloud will help craft conversion ROI from another existing vendor as part of our initial discussions. If so, what are the data points I must provide to perform the ROI analysis?
That's a fair question. So JumpCloud, like many other vendors, we can provide you with toolkits to do TCO. So we quite literally can provide customers with spreadsheets and that are of course automated, so that you can calculate your TCO and your opportunities based on your current configuration. So typically you can contact us, and most of our customers who do contact us are actually using the product. So I will point out that JumpCloud's free, all of the features, if you have less than 10 users. So most customers start by just using our platform. And then you can, reach out to our sales or basically our account management team and say, hey, I want to learn more. I want to think about this. And we can provide you with tooling and do Q&A and get you to where you need to be, so that if you are looking to make changes, you can build your business case. So pretty detailed information there, and you just need to reach out to us.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Greg. Steve, jumping over to you, what is the difference between an account deactivation and an account suspension?
Oh, yeah, great question. I know that's something I sort of went by very quickly earlier. I didn't have time to elaborate on it. When a user no longer needs access to IT services, such as following an employment termination, you would deactivate their account. That means you're permanently removing access to those accounts. But sometimes you only want to temporarily disable their access. Now, for instance, if an employee goes on a leave of absence, or alternatively, if you think you might need access to that account at a later date. In that case, you'll just want to suspend the accounts. Access is disabled, but can be reactivated if needed. Now, you could actually combine that a suspension with a scheduled deactivation. So a suspended account could be permanently removed after like 6 months or a year or whatever, automatically, so that you don't forget it and it just remains around forever. So those are just some of the options you would have in managing the loss of employees. You certainly don't want to keep unused accounts active, because that's just a huge security hole for your organization.
Thank you for that clarification. Let's take one more question from you, Greg, before we wrap it up. I recall hearing in the past that JumpCloud managed only identities and configurations for desktop computers. Has that changed? Oh,
that's a good question. Yeah, actually, it has changed. So JumpCloud manages devices too. So it is true we started with desktop and corporate-owned resources, but like every other vendor, we now actually support Android, iOS. So we also support Linux. About 25% of our devices are Linux servers, so you can manage your cloud workloads as well as Windows and Mac. So good question. We support every OS that matters.
Great. Thank you both for that information. And I wanted to thank our audience for taking time out of your schedule to join us. Please be on the lookout for the email from EMA with resources from today's event. Thanks again for joining us, and I hope we'll see you at a future EMA research webinar.